Hey, why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your Library of NIH Grantsmanship courses. I have closing in on 40 years experience at NIH, first as an applicant, then as a postdoctoral fellow, then as a staff writer for Francis Collins, and now as a full-time grant editor and mentor and trainer. And I've helped clients land. We're in the process of updating the number. It's closing in on 700 million in federal funding. And I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions as best I can. So feel free to load them up in the Q&A box. So for those of you who are new or need a reminder, you're in listen-only mode on this particular format. You can type your questions in the Q&A box right now. And I'll answer them in the order in which they come in. If you're looking for more individualized advising, I would encourage you to come to my monthly virtual office hours, which are on the first Friday of every month at 11:30 Eastern Time. So if you would like to register for that service, Jamie will put the registration for First Fridays in the chat right now. What you should be viewing in the library, we're in mid-April, so hopefully you're closing in on finishing viewing anything in the library and are, kind of in the final weeks of prepping your June application. So I would encourage you potentially to be looking at things like checklists to avoid top mistakes. If you're applying in the R or K series, maybe looking at chapters 3 and 4 to kind of run a checklist against your significance, innovation, and approach sections. Or maybe some of you are, early birds for the October deadline, in which case you're going to be looking at the chapter 1 of those writing courses and vetting your project idea and talking with the program officer. So it looks like that the registration for First Fridays is now in the chat if that is of interest to anybody. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. I'm going to mention the topics that are coming up. Let's see, today is the 15th and April 29th. The topic for the our mini tutorial for the Ask the Grant Writing Expert is going to be on R15 mechanisms. So would encourage you to attend that session if that is of interest to you. So I did get 2 questions that were emailed to me. So while we wait for people to put their questions in the chat, I'm going to, and actually I was writing a response to the person as we were talking. So and again, I always, when people email me questions, I strip out any identifying information and try to give you the most generic and universally applicable version of the question that I can. So the first question was asking about highlighted topics, these highlighted topics that NIH has been talking about. So I don't know if anybody has seen them, but there are these lists of highlighted topics. They look a lot like NOSIs, Notice of Special Interest. So, and that seems to be kind of on brand for the current administration, where they are taking something that already exists at NIH, retooling it a little bit, like they've done this with several websites, for example, retool it very slightly, and then kind of rebrand it as something new that they've created, when in reality it's pretty much what existed before, but is going by a different name. So the highlighted topics look a lot like NOSIs, Notice of Special Interest. And basically they're a way for institutes to communicate about their funding priorities to the applicants. So it's the same kind of thing. Let me see if I can actually pull one up for you so that you can see what it looks like. Let's see. Did I have one open? I may have had one open. Yeah, I do have one open. So I'm going to try to screen share. Okay. So this is a highlighted topic. I clicked on it from a list, an emailed list of highlighted topics. So here it's technology development for genomics. And then here's the posted date. Here's the expiration date. It expires at the end of August. It doesn't have a note, like a number associated with it, like the NOCs do. It's just the topic, but it gives some information and it gives a bulleted list of things that goals for that particular topic. And then it shows the participating institute centers and offices. So, and they may give specific information about what that institute is looking for. So for like NHGRI, their interest includes all of the examples above, but the focus is on approaches that are comprehensive, like genome-wide or transcriptome-wide and generalizable, likely to be useful for many. So there's something a little bit sometimes more specific about what the institute is looking for. But as you can see, they're just another way for, like, I don't want people to get tripped up by these. It's just another way for institutes to communicate with applicants about what their funding priorities are. And again, part of the reason that NIH does this is that unlike other federal agencies, the vast majority of the money that goes out at NIH goes out under what are called investigator-initiated NOFOs, or the parent announcements, where they're not tied to a topic. The idea is, here's the maximum number of years, the maximum budget, come to us with an idea. But that doesn't mean that institutes don't have funding priorities, and they communicate about those funding priorities in various ways. It used to be through NOCs. Right now, they're through these highlighted topics. So I'm going to drop this link in the chat for people in case it would be helpful. But anyway, here are, you can see the active highlighted topics right now. And just like NOFOs, there's some institute that sponsors it and others that participate, when it was posted, when it was expired. This is exactly what NOFOs look like when you search for NOFOs, but these are highlighted topics. So just so that people don't get tripped up by that. And before I forget, let me just drop in the chat that URL. Okay. All right. So the URL for the current highlighted topics is in the chat right now. I did have another emailed question about U mechanisms, but I have a bunch that are coming in the Q&A, so I'm just going to start answering those. I'm working on an R21 resubmission, and the reviewer comments were relatively easy to address, non-substantial changes. Can you talk about the importance of the response to review versus extensive modification to the actual scientific text, research strategy, specific aims, et cetera? Sure. So I do think that how responsive you are on a resubmission can cover an incredibly broad range. So if the reviewers on the initial submission were very favorable, reviewers are not going to be looking for you to make a lot of changes in the aims or the research strategy. And in fact, I have historically had applicants who have had really favorable reviews where they write a one-page introduction to the revised application, which is known colloquially as the response to reviewers, where they speak about the response to the reviewer comments, but they make almost no revisions to the 6-page application. And in one memorable case, this was a number of years ago, I had an applicant who did not score that well. He scored really not very well at all on his, it was actually an R01, not an R21. But he disagreed with a lot of what the reviewers said. And so he wrote in his introduction to the revised application, he didn't say, I respectfully disagree, or the reviewer didn't understand, blah, blah, blah. Any of you who have watched my master resubmissions course, you know I'm not a fan of that kind of language. Answer with facts. So this person would briefly list the critique and then list a fact. The reason why we did not choose to use this technique mentioned by the reviewers because of blah, blah, blah. And so we felt that it would be better to do this other technique. The reason we chose this control and not the one suggested by the reviewers because of blah, blah, blah. And sometimes in a situation like that, you're not going to make a lot of changes. And in this particular instance, the person made almost no changes. They went through and explained themselves, and they got funded on the resubmission. And one of the reviewers on the summary statement on the resubmission actually said how incredibly responsive the person was to the reviewer critiques on the A0. So make of that what you will. I mean, typically on an A0, on a triaged A0, you are going to make pretty extensive changes. But in this instance, they liked it. They didn't ask for substantial revisions. It's okay not to make substantial revisions as long as you can address what they did request. Even if you're not going to make a change, even if addressing it means saying we don't agree with it because of blah, blah, blah. You know, you would say it in a gentler way, but yeah, if you scored well on the first submission, you know, reviewers are not going to be looking for extensive revisions on the resubmission. So you can address their comments in the one-page introduction and make minor revisions on the research strategy as long as the one-page introduction is the most important page on a resubmission. As long as you can justify, as long as you can respond appropriately to their major critiques in that one-page introduction, I think that is hugely important and potentially, arguably more important than making a lot of changes on the project itself, for whatever that's worth, particularly when you've scored well. Obviously, if it's triaged, that may be a different thing. So, okay, so Nathan, I hope that answers your questions. If not, please let me know how else I can help. What is the NIH's policy for AI use? The policy is it's not allowed, period, the end. And it's actually bundled in with a notice about a cap on the number of applications that a PI can submit in a calendar year as PI. And I think the cap is, I think it's 6. I think you can submit, I think, 6 applications as a PI in a calendar year. The reason that they're bundled together is because, as the notice says, there was a tiny fraction of applicants who were submitting upwards of 40 applications a year. And almost certainly they were doing that with the help of AI. So the notice actually bundles those two seemingly disparate things together into a single notice. If you're interested in which notice that is, I actually discuss this in my Master the R series course, and I list the notice there. It's probably in chapter 1, if I had to guess. Okay, I just found out about the Katz ESI R01 mechanism. It says no preliminary data allowed. Do you have any general strategic advice or important things to keep in mind when applying for this mechanism? Sure. So the Katz is a fairly recent mechanism that is an R01 level mechanism that is open to early stage investigators. So early stage investigator, just to remind people, you're 10 years or less from your terminal degree or your last clinical training, and you have not served as PI on an R01 equivalent. Not co-investigator or consultant, PI, and only on an R01 or equivalent. Has nothing to do with R03, R21, any of those. So this is a situation where, and the thing that's interesting about the Katz is that more people are applying for it now because the DP2 and the DP5 have not yet been renewed. So those are 2 high risk, high reward mechanisms that are open to junior investigators, and those are funded out of the Common Fund. So the thing to know about the Katz is that it's meant to be for applicants who are changing research direction. So in a sense, it's like an R21, but it's more years and a larger budget than an R21. And, you know, typical R21 is 2 years, 275,000 directs. This is an R01 level mechanism. So it's more years, more money. But it's like an R21. It can serve that purpose of somebody who's changing research direction when they're earlier in their career. And this isn't one of these situations where preliminary data are discouraged or they're not necessary. They are not allowed. You absolutely cannot report preliminary data. And the tricky thing on the review is to justify that it truly is a new research direction. And fairly recently, I'm going to see if I can find it. Fairly recently, one institute issued an example of the change of research direction. It's a one-page document that you're supposed to write up that justifies that this is truly a change of research direction. So let me see if I can quickly find it. NIH Katz R01 change of research direction sample. And there it is. It was Aging that put it out. So I'm going to drop the URL for that in the chat. Okay. Hang on one sec. Okay, so for the person who asked the question, you'll see in the chat from me an NIA website R01 sample app. That is the sample of the one-page research direction. So this is a very competitive mechanism. I don't know many people who have gotten them. And my guess is that they're even harder to land now that people can't apply for the DP2 and the DP5. So if they're looking for something outside of the general ESI funding advantage conferred to them on the Parent R01, this is one of the few options open to them. This and the MIRA, like the NIGMS sponsors an ESI version of a MIRA, which I don't think has been released yet still. So that's the R35. But yeah, the DP2 and the DP5 have not been re-released yet. So the strategy that most people use with the cats, like off the books, the strategy that most people use with the cats is that as they're changing research direction and they don't have enough preliminary data and publications to be competitive at the R01 level, they'll put in a cats and withhold the data and pretend like they don't have data, even though they do have some, but not enough to be competitive at a traditional R01. So basically, if you're an ESI applicant and you don't have enough data to be competitive at the R01 level, your choices are to apply for a CATS and withhold the data or apply for a small format R like an R03 and R21, where the requirement for preliminary data is lower. So if you go the route of the CATS, typically what people do off the record is they'll withhold the data, put the application in, and while they're waiting for a decision, which can take upwards of a year at NIH, especially lately, the funding decisions have been so delayed with all the shenanigans at NIH. While you're waiting for your decision, you use other sources of funding, either foundation or startup funds, to beef up your preliminary data. And if you get the CATS, you go ahead and do the project, and pick it up where you've left off in the past year. If you don't get it, you will have been working on it for the past year or so using other sources of funding. And then you might be competitive, at a small format R level, or maybe even an R01 level. So those are the strategies that people use. But I will say when I look at the summary statements for CAT submissions, one of the absolute biggest things that reviewers comment on is whether or not it truly is a change of research direction, and whether the reviewers bought that. So I would encourage you to take a look at that sample that I dropped in the chat. That seems to be one of the main sticking points for those review panels. Okay. And if you have, Bo, if you have other questions about that, let me know. I hope that was helpful. I contacted a program officer at NCI to discuss my specific aims idea for an R21. The PO said the following to me in an email. Please feel free to discuss the possibility of submitting and awaiting receipt of application request, regardless of the budget to be requested. I am not sure what this means. Can you please explain this to me? This is a new one for me. I don't know what an awaiting receipt of applications ARA request is. I've never heard of that. So if anybody, I apologize, but I in all my years at NIH, I've never heard of that. So if anybody has ever heard of that, let me know if you've got something to say. Awaiting receipt of application request, NIH. Let's see. So this is post-submission. That's why I probably don't know about it because I never get involved in this level. So just Googling it, I'm sure you've done this. Awaiting receipt of application, the main role of the ARA module is for funding agency staff to electronically track and link information received in advance of submission to a grant application after the application is received or logged into the ARA system. Yeah, I think they misunderstood what you were asking them. So it sounds to me like this is a mechanism for taking pieces of information that are for an application that are uploaded at different times and making sure that they all wind up in the same application. That's what this sounds like to me. Because sometimes that happens where things are uploaded at different times for various reasons. I think they may have misunderstood. Yeah, that sounds like what this is. I think they may have misunderstood what you were asking. So what you may want to do is email them back and say, I am thinking of submitting an R21 application to NCI. I have not written it. It is at the idea stage. I want to make sure that the concept fits your funding priorities at this time. Do you have time for a brief call to review my concept? I've researched it in the reporter website and it seems to be of interest to NCI, but I just want to make sure before I write it that it fits NCI's funding priorities at this time. Do not mention an Ames page. I think this person probably was rushed and read this and misunderstood what you were talking about because this awaiting receipt of application mechanism seems to be a way of connecting pieces of an application that are uploaded at different times. I think I never upload and I don't get involved after upload. I usually just work on narrative and concept before a person applies, but that seems like what this is. I think they misunderstood. So that's my suggestion to you, is to send an email that says, I want to review my idea for an R21 application with you to make sure it fits your funding priorities at this time. Do you have time for a brief call to discuss my R21 idea? And then don't mention anything about Ames or Ames pages. And make sure they understand that this is at the idea stage. It's a concept. You haven't written it up yet. There's nothing to upload. Okay, given the current funding landscape, man, if I had $1 for every question that has been sent to me that opens that way, given the current funding landscape, do you anticipate the Katz mechanism remaining available over the next 1 to 2 years? Additionally, since Katz applications are reviewed within the broader R01 pool, what are your thoughts on pursuing a Parent R01 now, strengthening the application with additional publications over the next year, and then resubmitting? So the first part of this is, what do I think about the longevity of Katz in the current funding climate? I think it's actually pretty good because the Katz actually, there was a brief period when that NOFA wasn't active last year. I think it was early expired. I think that was the shenanigans that happened in 2025. I think it was one of those 50 some odd NOFOs that were early expired, but it's actually been active for most of the current administration, which isn't necessarily true for like the DP2, the DP5, the MIRA, the NIGMS MIRA, other types of R35s. There used to be 3 other types of R35s. Now there's only one other type besides the GMS MIRA. So I think it's not going away. I think it's probably seems to be faring okay compared to other non-parent mechanisms in the current climate. And then the other question, and additionally, since Katz applications are reviewed within the broader R01 pool, they are grouped, just so that people know. I believe they are grouped at the study section. I think all the Katz applications are reviewed at once, and then all of the traditional R01s are reviewed at once. But given that, what are your thoughts on pursuing a Parent R01 now, strengthening the application with additional publications over the next year, and then resubmitting? So this is really a question of how much data and publications do you have? And before people barrage me with the typical question of how much is enough, that's really a question to discuss with your mentor. So if you really don't even have enough data and publications where you feel like you would be competitive at the R03 or R21 level, then the Katz might be the right choice. And remember, you don't have to resubmit a Katz. You could choose to withhold some data from the Katz and pretend like you don't have any data. And then, 9 months or a year later, if you're not funded under the Katz, you don't have to resubmit the Katz. You could, if you've been working on the project over that time period and you've beefed up your preliminary data and publications, you could put it in as an A0 in a Parent R01 mechanism. You don't have to resubmit the Katz. So it's really, I think it's a question of how much preliminary data you have. So if it's embarrassingly low, you may want to go with the Katz. If you have some and it's kind of like, I'm not really sure I would be competitive at the R01 level, then maybe put in that first R01, recognizing that statistically very few applicants are funded on an A0 R01. Just, statistically speaking, this has always been the case at NIH. Dating all the way back to prior to the 2 strikes, you're out rule. Like when I was coming up, there used to be something called an A2. So you would have an A0, which is the first submission, and A1 was a resubmission. And then an A2 was a resubmission of the resubmission. And then the idea was done. So statistically back then, it was the 3rd submission where people got funded. Now, statistically, it's the 2nd submission where they get funded. So although, of course, you can retool an idea and submit it ad nauseum now. So it's a little less meaningful than it used to be to discuss these things. But yeah, it's a question of how much preliminary data and how many publications you have. So I would discuss with your seasoned mentor, who is one of my very favorite researchers in the whole world. I would discuss with him what you should do in that situation. If it's just like it would be embarrassingly low for an R01, put in a Katz. If it's like borderline, put in the A1 and see how the study section. Okay, you've talked with them, yeah. See how the study section reacts. In general, I am a fan of putting in your application sooner rather than later, because NIH grant writing, while it has always been iterative, it is more iterative than ever. So a lot of the game right now is in submitting, retooling, resubmitting, playing around, figuring out if this is the right study section, maybe asking the SRO for, like an ad hoc member for the study section, or switching study sections, or switching mechanisms, or, kind of playing around with all the different ways to change the setup of a submission and how you submit a given idea and see what sticks. It's very few people will get the right mechanism and the optimal study section and a favorable set of reviewers right out of the gate. That doesn't often happen for people. So getting the application submitted is important. Getting in the game is important. So if it's borderline, you may want to just, borderline whether it would be competitive at a Parent R01, you may want to just put in the R01 and just, like I always say, it's like throwing pasta on the wall to see what sticks, and just see how reviewers react to it and start playing around with that. So, okay. All right. So that is what I have in the Q&A at the moment. We still have time, so feel free to put more questions in there. I did have a person who asked about U mechanisms, which are cooperative agreements. And the person said they had heard a rumor that NIH is considering discontinuing the U mechanisms, and that she had noticed that none of the recent forecasted mechanisms are used, and there are a few active U's at the moment. So And then she went on from there to discuss more details. But I have not heard anything about NIH considering discontinuing the cooperative agreements or U mechanisms. So if anybody has heard that, let me know. And for those who don't know, cooperative agreements are these really interesting mechanisms that are, if you have the independent R series mechanisms like an R01, R21, R03, those are led by the researcher. You write progress reports once a year, but mostly NIH leaves you alone to go do your thing. So that's on one end of the continuum. On the other end of the continuum is a contract, which few of you will apply for during your career, but some of you may. And in a contract, NIH has total control. They say, here's what we need you to do. This is exactly what we need you to do. And we're going to be heavily involved in making sure it happens exactly like that. So, for example, I worked on a contract for the Cancer Genome Atlas biorepository. I worked with a group to become the sole source contract for taking in and labeling and storing biosamples for the Cancer Genome Atlas. That would be an example of a contract at NIH, where NIH program staff have tons and tons of oversight and they are kind of running the show. Midway between that is a cooperative agreement, which is a U mechanism. And they can be networked or not. So when they're networked, you actually operate as part of a coalition of researchers whose research teams contribute one piece of a bigger whole. Like there's this big objective. But sometimes cooperative agreements are standalone and they're not networked. So I have a whole course on this if you're interested in them. It's Master the U series. I do not think that NIH has plans to discontinue the U mechanisms. My guess is that the problem is, of course, that not only are NOFOs being held up, I can't tell you in the last month how many times I've had people contact me with some version of the "where's my NOFO" question. Today it was somebody waiting for a U19 that is forecasted to be released from dental and craniofacial. I've had a team that's been waiting for their COBRI for over a year that's been forecasted. So yeah, some version of the "where's my NOFO." The problem with the release of these NOFOs, there are many pieces of this that are problematic. Of course, we all know the big ones are that the government shut down, and then after that there was not an FY26 budget for quite some time. So that created delays. The other things that are creating really substantial delays is that the current administration is moving away from topic-specific mechanisms, and many cooperative agreements and center grants are tied to topics. Not all of them. You could have like a center of excellence, and as long as a P50, and as long as it's within the mission of the institute, then it's fine. It's not topic specific. There's also this move to shifting. Cooperative agreements tend to be reviewed in institutes, and now there's this move with this administration to move those reviews to the Center for Scientific Review, which is a horrible idea on so many levels, but that's what they want to do. And so that change is going to cause some delays as well. In addition, NIH is incredibly short-staffed because so many people retired or were retired. And because of that, a lot of institutional memory has been lost there. All of these other things are also contributing to delays in the release of NOFOs for complex submissions. And it's just the approval process, while it was always onerous for topic-specific and complex submissions, it's worse than ever now. There are many more steps. It's much more complicated, much more time-consuming to get sign-off on a concept and to turn a concept into an actual NOFO. So there are many NOFOs that are forecasted. And as I said, I was on a call with somebody today for a forecasted U19. But when it will be released is anybody's guess, right? So, and then the problem is that they'll give you like 6 to 8 weeks to the NIH drop deadline to write these complex submissions, which is sheer madness. That's insanity, because these submissions sometimes are very lengthy, right? Like maybe they're 12 pages, maybe they're 30, maybe they're 96. It could be like any, it's just craziness. So anyway, if anybody has, that's my take on it. I have not heard anything about NIH considering eliminating cooperative agreements. If anybody knows of anything that they've heard, I'm not talking about rumors and guesses on social media. I'm trying really hard to make sure that anything we're discussing here is not fear mongering, because I think that is causing a lot of damage and is part of the goal. And I don't want to participate in it. So, yeah. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, let me know. Anything substantiated. Okay. So follow-up question on here's just related to the U question. Our U54 is up for renewal and I haven't heard anything about them removing it. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the whole CTSA program is funded. Aren't they funded at the moment as a UM1? I think is how the CTSA program is all. They used to be U54s, but I think at present they're UM1s. Like I just can't picture them eliminating like all of the cooperative agreements. I think the problem is they require a lot more input from program staff than like R's or K's. And everybody is short-staffed there, and a lot of institutional memory is lost, and a lot of cooperative agreements are topic specific, and they're taking longer than ever to be approved, anything topic specific. So yeah. Follow-up question on my R21 resubmission. It actually aligns really well with the highlighted topic you shared regarding technology development for genomics. Yay! What a coincidence for the ICO NAIAD. Should I reference this highlighted topic in the resubmission? Yes. Will that change my study section? Could you discuss the positives and negatives of this approach? Sure. So I was actually in the process of writing a response to this client and thinking that for this highlighted topic, issue that I would turn this into a monthly newsletter tip and do some social media posts on it, because I suspected that people were going to be like, what are these things and what do I do with them? So we've already talked about what I think they are, that it's a way of communicating funding priorities and is very much like a no-see. So this question is more, what do I do with that information? And this is exactly how I broke down this email response to my client, is what they are, where to mention them in the application. So this particular person said that their program officer mentioned, oh, you could talk about this in the letter of intent and potentially in the abstract. I don't necessarily agree with that, even though that is advice coming from a program officer. So, and I'll give you the pros and cons of what I think of that suggestion and where I think that you should say it. So I think it's worth mentioning. I would mention it in the same way that you would have mentioned a no-see in the past. And Nathan, I don't know how long you've been around, if you know about no-sees, but basically over the course of NIH's history, there have been a variety of ways in which NIH communicates about their funding priorities to applicants. And they have to do this because so much of their money goes out under NOFOs that are not tied to topics. It's something unique about NIH compared to other federal agencies. So how does NIH communicate about their funding priorities? It's a big part of Chapter 1, Master the R series. But in recent years, they had these notices of special interest. Now they have these no fees. These highlighted topics, rather. And they all get mentioned in the same place. So wherever you've picked up your information about the funding priorities of your institute, whether it's from an annual report or a strategic plan or a highlighted topic or a no-see or an appropriation report, wherever you have seen it, it should be mentioned how your project aligns with that topic of special interest. It, in my opinion, should go in the narrative overview of the aims page. Like, it's important enough to warrant a sentence, in my opinion, in the narrative overview of the aims page. I would put several sentences about it in the significance section. And in fact, the one that I showed you, technology development for genomics, had bullets. If you are responsive to a specific bullet, I would list the bullet verbatim in the significance section. So, I think the bulleted list in that highlighted topic were the goals of the highlighted topic. So, you could put it in quotes and say we are responsive to the bullet that states, quote, and then put it in the significance section. Any place you discuss impact, I would mention it there too, that it aligns with the Institute's funding priorities at this time. Information which we gathered from name the source, whatever it is, the strategic plan, an annual report, a highlighted topic, a NOSI, whatever the thing is. And if you have space, you could put it in the 30-line abstract, but I personally don't think that a lot of reviewers at any level of review are reading the abstract. So, my clients who are reviewers, many of them tell me they never look at the 30-line abstract or the 3-sentence project narrative. Sometimes people look at it at council, where the funding decision is made, but I'm not even sure they're looking at it very closely there either. I think that abstracts are read primarily in the reporter website after funding. So I worry that if that's the main place you've listed it, that it's going to be lost. Whereas if you put it in the narrative overview of the Ames page, nobody's going to miss it. Everybody looks at the Ames page. And then strategically positioned where you have impact statements and maybe, a longer treatment of that topic in the significance section. In terms of the program officer suggesting that they put it in the LOI, letters of intent are typically for topic-specific one-off NOFOs like RFAs, and the letter of intent is used to set up an ad hoc panel. That's not really particularly prevalent right now, letters of intent, because, there aren't that many ad hoc panels. The move is to have everything reviewed at CSR, and not to have NOFOs that are topic specific. And then I thought to myself, maybe the program officer misspoke and they meant the cover letter, but I wouldn't put it there either. It doesn't belong in the cover letter. That's something that you might have done 10 years ago. But the cover letter has very specific purposes right now. And while you could mention it there, it's not going to hurt to mention it there. I certainly wouldn't rely on anybody seeing it for sure if you put it in a cover letter. I think it's okay to duplicate the information in a cover letter, but to my mind, the primary place for that information is at the beginning of the narrative overview on the Ames page. I don't see a downside to mentioning this. It does, it will take up space on your Ames page, but you could do it literally in a sentence that, our project is responsive to the XYZ highlighted topic. They used to have numbers for NOCs, but you're actually going to have to write out the name of the highlighted topic. It's responsive to the highlighted topic that our target institute participates in, and you can name the institute. So you lose a sentence, maybe a line or two of text on the Ames page, but I think it's important enough to put it there. I don't see a downside there. I don't see a negative in discussing it at all. Anytime you can say that your grant application aligns with the priorities of the funder, whether that's at NIH, another federal agency, a private funder, and anybody you're asking for money, if you can say this project is aligned with your funding priorities, that's always going to be a very important thing to say. And so he also asked, would you also add it to the response page? So, and just so people know, he's talking about the introduction to the revised application, the one-page response to reviewers that goes in with a resubmission. You could, if you have room and you can do it briefly, you could put it in, I wouldn't list it out like you list out the critiques, but you could put it in that couple of sentences at the beginning where you say, we appreciate that reviewers took the time to review the application. We used your critiques to strengthen it. We appreciate that reviewers liked X, Y, and Z about the application, name some positive things. And then at the end of that, you could say, we also recognize that this project is responsive to the funding priorities of this institute of NIAID as stated in highlighted topic, and then quote and write the highlighted topic. So again, you could probably do it probably not in one line, but maybe two. So if you could fit it in 2 lines, that would be good, especially if they don't have, you said they didn't have many substantive critiques of the project. So why not say this? The other place where I would consider putting it, last year I did a mini tutorial on rebuttals. So if people don't know what those are, and just so you know, everybody who's on this session, no matter what membership you came in through, you can view a recording of that session. I think it was from late June 2025. It's a mini tutorial on rebuttals. So you can either watch it through your bonus mini tutorials course where it's listed by topic, or you could watch it by watching recordings of the full 1-hour Ask the Grant Writing Expert Q&A live stream, and in which case look for the June 2025. I think it was like June 25th or something. Rebuttals are when you have scored fairly solidly, but not a slam dunk at the first level of review at the study section, and you're about to go into review at the second level of review, which is the council, advisory council to the institute director, where the funding decision is made. And your program officer may come back and say, can you give me some talking points to go into the council meeting and pitch your project for funding? Some program officers call that a rebuttal. Sometimes they'll just say, I just need your response to the reviewer critiques. So this is still, you're at the A0 level, just so you know. Or it could be a review of an A1, I guess. But this is while the funding decision has not quite been made yet. That is another place. So Nathan, if you score well on the resubmission of your R21, and it's kind of like a borderline score, it's not a slam dunk, and your program officer calls you up or emails you and says, hey, can you give me a rebuttal or some talking points to take in with me to council to pitch for funding for your project? That is the place to say, our project is perfectly aligned with the funding priorities of the Institute as stated by highlighted topic, and then give the title of the highlighted topic. That would be an ideal scenario. But not every person is going to have the opportunity to submit a rebuttal. So you got to find other places to stay at in the main application. And my preferred way to do that would be on the narrative overview of the Ames page. But sure, if you have space in the response to the reviewers, do it there too. Okay. You're welcome. I'm glad that was helpful. Okay, so we have a couple of minutes left. Do people have questions? Any more questions? If not, I'm just going to review again the upcoming live formats. 2 weeks from today at the April 29th session of the Ask the Grant Writing Expert, I'll be doing a mini tutorial on R15 grants, the area grants, which are for, I know we have one team organization that is R15 eligible. So R15s are for places that have had a limited amount of federal funding in 4 of the last 7 years. I forget what the dollar amount is, like maybe 7 million or something. Sometimes it's done at the institution level, but I've seen people be eligible at the department level. I'm never quite sure how that works, but I'm going to give a tutorial on what R15s are and tips for writing them. And then the next virtual office hours is Friday, May 1st. So that's at 11:30 Eastern, and that's for an hour. And it's just a drop-in Zoom call. They're very casual. They tend to be pretty intimate. I tend to get fewer people coming to that. And people can speak. You're not in listen only mode. So I enable everybody to speak, and there's back and forth and people can discuss things. It's not one-on-one with me because there are people lurking listening to your answer, but it is a way to speak with me directly about your submission. And people come and go. It's a very kind of casual thing. And then we move into the May Ask the Grant Writing Experts on May 13th and 27th. And when people are in the thick of deadlines, I always just do pure Q&A sessions. So May 13th and 27th will be, there won't be any mini tutorials. And then we start the summer topics, which I won't go into, but we've got lots of exciting things lined up. I have a new colleague who's going to be talking about SBIRs and using AI to search the reporter database and gather metrics and intelligence about the funding portfolio at NIH, which I think is really cool. What else do we have? I won't go into all the topics, but we're scheduled now, I think, through late October. But send me any topics that you want me to discuss. I'm always looking for mini tutorial topics. So if people have anything they would like me to discuss as a bonus mini tutorial, feel free to let me know. Okay, and I think that's it. We're going to wrap up a couple of minutes early. Thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate your support and your questions. And as the French would say, courage, hang in there. And I'm sure a lot of you are writing. Cycle 2 seems to be super busy. I've got so many people applying for the June and July deadlines for whatever reason. But yeah, so you need to give us a French response. Oh, I don't have a response in French, English, or Italian at this moment. So anyway, I wish you all the very best. Bonne chance, I guess, is the best thing for me to say. Courage et bonne chance. And I will see you all in a couple of weeks. Take care. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.